The breeding trio cost her $1.40 from the back of Herb Decker's wagon on a Tuesday in April 1932, and Nora Vance bought them before anyone else at the dispersal had thought to wonder what they were worth. There were 20 men at that sale, and not one of them put in a bid. Herb Decker had run 500 acres of mixed grain and poultry outside of Cushing for 30 years, and the bank had taken all of it in February. And what was left, the seed corn, 2 milk cows, a rusted disc harrow, and a wire cage with 1 White Holland tom and 2 hens, was being sold on a gray Tuesday morning to whoever showed up. The tom stood at the back of the cage with his tail fanned wide, all white, not a dark feather on him, watching the proceedings with the deliberate patience of an animal that has no opinion about the humans arguing over his future. The hens stood close together and said nothing. Nora had driven the 12 miles from her father's farm, her farm now, since March, in the Ford pickup that needed a new water pump and would get one when she could afford it. She had $14 in the envelope in her coat pocket. She had a land note of $480 outstanding at the Pawnee County Bank, with a payment due in October that she could not currently make, and a due-in-full date of April 1933 that she was trying not to think about more than 3 times a day. She looked at the cage for a long time. She looked at the men looking past it toward the disc harrow. Then she went to Herb Decker, who was standing to the side with the hollow expression of a man watching his life be itemized, and she asked him what he wanted for the turkeys. He named $1.40. She paid it and loaded the cage into her truck before anyone had the chance to reconsider. On the drive home, the tom spread his tail against the cage wire and held it there, bright red wattle vivid against all that white, and Nora drove 12 miles of red clay Oklahoma road and thought about the Drake Hotel in Chicago and whether they had a purchasing agent, and whether a letter sent blind to a purchasing agent in Chicago would be laughed at or read. She decided it would be read. She had always been better at deciding things were possible than at finding reasons they weren't. Her father had called this stubbornness. Her mother, before she died, had called it a gift. The farm was 80 acres of good bottomland and 20 acres of clay hill, and Franklin Vance had bought it in 1911 on a 30-year land note at 4% interest. He had made every payment on time for 19 years, and then the wheat price collapsed, and he died of a heart attack in the barn on a cold March morning in 1932, leaving Nora an 80-acre farm, a truck that needed a water pump, and $260 remaining on a land note the bank could call due in full if she missed a single payment. 3 men had come to the door in the 2 weeks after the funeral to tell her, in the carefully gentle tones of people delivering inevitable news, that a young woman alone could not manage this property, and that the sensible thing was to sell. Nora had thanked each of them and meant none of it. She put the turkey pen on the south side of the barn where the afternoon sun hit longest. She built it herself from salvaged lumber and chicken wire, 4 posts driven into the ground, a roof of corrugated tin salvaged from the old pig shelter. The tom walked the perimeter of it twice when she set him loose, fanning his tail and looking at the horizon, and then settled in the middle of the pen and began to eat. She named him nothing. She had a policy about production animals that her father had taught her. Before we find out what Nora does with those 3 White Holland turkeys, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. This channel reaches people from all across the country, and we love knowing where our stories land. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now. We have new stories every week. The letter to the Drake Hotel took her 3 evenings to write. She addressed it to the purchasing department, provisions, and kept it to 1 page. The breed, the dressed weight, the fact that she intended to establish a dedicated flock for hotel supply. She had read that the Drake had difficulty sourcing premium dressed white turkey from within the region, and she believed she could resolve that difficulty by the fall of 1932. She did not mention the land note. She did not mention she was 28 years old or running the farm alone. These were facts that would not help the letter. She sent it on a Thursday, and did not think about it again because thinking about it would not change what came back. What came back 3 weeks later was a letter from a Mr. Arthur Klemp, provisions manager, Drake Hotel, Chicago. He wrote that the hotel had indeed been experiencing difficulty sourcing White Holland birds, and that he would be interested in establishing a supply relationship pending inspection of the operation by a Chicago buyer who traveled the region in August. He enclosed a price schedule. Premium dressed white turkey, 31 cents per pound dressed weight. Minimum order of 8 birds per shipment. Shipment via Railway Express Agency to the hotel's receiving dock. Nora read the letter twice at the kitchen table. Then she folded it and put it in the envelope and set it on top of the land note document in the tin box under the kitchen floorboard, because those 2 pieces of paper now belonged together. The hens began laying in the first week of May. Nora had read everything she could find about White Holland management, 1 chapter in a 1924 poultry extension bulletin, and 3 paragraphs in a farmer's almanac. What she knew: the hens would set naturally. Incubation was 28 days. Poults needed heat and dry conditions the first 6 weeks, and would die of cold or wet without argument. She collected 22 eggs and let both hens set. On the 28th day, 19 hatched. She watched the poults emerge small and yellow-white in the early June morning, and thought that 19 out of 22 was a number she could work with. The cold snap came 9 days later. It arrived from the north on a Tuesday night, the temperature dropping 40 degrees in 6 hours, and Nora woke at 2 in the morning to the particular silence that means something is wrong, and went out to the brooder house in her coat over her nightgown, and found the poults huddled in one shivering mass in the corner farthest from the draft. She brought the kerosene lantern from the barn, hung it low on the rafter above them, and sat on an overturned feed bucket, adjusting the lantern height every 20 minutes, until 5 in the morning, when the temperature outside began to come back up. When full light came, she counted them. 15. 4 had died in the night, chilled past what they could hold. She found them small and still, and moved them out without ceremony. 15 was a flock. She went inside and made coffee and sat at the table, and did not allow herself to think about the 4 she had lost. She thought instead about the 15 she had kept, and what they would weigh in October, and whether 15 market-weight toms by fall was possible from 15 poults in June. It was possible. 12 were toms, 3 were hens, which she had not planned for, and which changed the arithmetic in a useful direction. We're halfway through this story, and we want to know, have you ever raised heritage turkeys or any heritage poultry that the county told you wasn't worth the feed? Tell us in the comments. We read every one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is your reminder. New stories every week. The first Sunday in July was hot and flat and still, and Nora was checking the south fence line when she heard a truck slow on the county road. She did not go to the gate immediately. She was carrying a fence stapler and a coil of wire and had 2 more posts to check, and the truck slowing on the county road was the county road's business. But when it did not move on after a minute, she set the coil down and walked to the gate, because something slow on a road outside your fence is your business eventually. The truck was a dark green Ford, 2 years newer than hers, and the man behind the wheel had his arm on the door and was looking past the gate into the yard. He was looking at the turkey pen. The 12 toms she had moved to the south pasture lot that morning were working the grass in the sun, all white, their fanned tails catching the light. He looked at her when she reached the gate, and she looked at him. He had dark brown hair and chestnut-colored eyes that were warm and specific, and not what she had been expecting, though she had not been expecting anything. James Carver, he named himself without ceremony. I run the Carver grain operation east of here. I've been past this road twice a week for 2 years. He looked back at the turkeys. I've never seen White Hollands on this county. Nora told him she had started them in April. He asked how many she had, and she told him 12 toms and 3 hens now, from a breeding trio she had picked up in April. He nodded slowly, the way a person does when they are doing arithmetic in their head and finding it interesting. He did not tell her what to do with them. He did not offer advice. The white ones dressed cleaner than the bronze, he told her, and Chicago buyers had been short on them since most Oklahoma producers had gone back to bronze for the weight. He told her the way you tell a fact, without attaching any recommendation, because she clearly already knew it. She told him she had a letter from the Drake Hotel. He looked at her for a moment. Good. He drove on. She watched the truck go down the road and then went back to the fence stapler and the remaining posts and did not think about the encounter more than was necessary, which was not as little as she would have preferred. He came back the following Sunday with no stated reason. They talked about the grain outlook, the county bulletin on feed rationing, the water table in the south pasture. He asked one question about the Tom's weight gain, and she answered it. He asked nothing else about the operation. The third Sunday, she was sitting on the porch when he pulled up, and she brought 2 cups of coffee out without thinking about it, and then thought about it when she was already at the gate, but handed him the cup anyway because she had already made it. He thanked her. He wrapped both hands around it the way a person does when they are grateful for a thing they hadn't expected. They stood at the gate and talked about feed prices and whether the county would see rain before August. He did not thank her a second time or acknowledge what the coffee represented. He just drank it, and when it was done, handed the cup back and drove on. The first shipment left for Chicago on the 8th of October. She had 12 Toms dressed by the 1st of the month, working at the outdoor table from 4 in the morning until the light went, 3 days straight. She packed them in wooden crates with straw, the Railway Express labels filled out in her careful handwriting. James Carver appeared at 7 in the morning with no explanation and helped her lift the crates without being asked. He asked which end she wanted at the tail of the truck and said nothing else. When they were all loaded, he followed her to the depot in his truck, helped transfer the crates to the Railway Express cart, and stood back while she gave the station master the shipping documents herself, which was the correct thing to do. The station master glanced between them with the expression of a man who has an opinion he is keeping to himself and said the crates would be on the evening freight to Oklahoma City and connected to Chicago by Thursday morning. The check from the Drake arrived 2 weeks later. 11 days, dressed weight totaling 318 pounds at 31 cents per pound, $98.58. Minus the Railway Express freight of $4.20. $94.38 for 12 birds for 1 October. The land note payment due in October was $40. She made it with the check and had $54 left. The bank officer, Harold Prine, who had been careful and quiet with her since March, wrote "paid" in the ledger with a steadiness that told her he had not been entirely certain she would manage it. She thanked him and drove home. By November, the hens were already showing signs of a second clutch. She had written to Klimp at the Drake, and he could take 20 birds in spring if she could provide them. She had 3 hens. 1 breeding Tom was enough to cover 6 hens, and she had 12. The arithmetic pointed somewhere she had not allowed herself to look at directly. She wrote to 2 other hotels, the Mayo in Tulsa, the Skirvin in Oklahoma City. Both had purchasing departments. Both were looking for local premium supply. By February, she had letters from both of them. She sat down and worked the numbers. 3 breeding trios running a full season gave her a potential market crop of 60 birds by the following October. At an average dressed weight of 28 pounds, 31 cents a pound, minus feed and freight, she was looking at $400 clear. More than enough to make the April 1933 payment. More than enough to start putting money toward the note principal. She needed 2 more breeding trios and could not afford them at current prices. She wrote to the Oklahoma A&M Extension Office, and the agent, a man named Raymond Flint, wrote back within 10 days with the name of a woman in Shawnee who was looking to reduce a breeding flock. Nora drove to Shawnee on a Tuesday in March and came home with 2 breeding trios for $8, which cleaned out what remained of the first Drake check and put her at 0, with 3 months until the new Toms would be old enough to range. James Carver came by on a Sunday in April, as he had been doing most Sundays through the winter, and she told him about the Shawnee purchase. He looked at the 3 new pins she had built behind the barn and was quiet for a moment. "You built those yourself?" She told him she had. He looked at the corner joints on the first pin the way a carpenter looks at something done right and said nothing more. He came back on a Wednesday, not a Sunday, and she heard hammering from the brooder house roof. He was replacing the corrugated tin that had been letting water in since the February ice storm, which she had known about and been waiting to get to. She stood below the roof and told him she hadn't asked him to do that. He knew. He kept hammering. She watched him work for a moment, decided the moment did not require more, and went back to the feed mixing she had been doing. When he came down, he refused coffee and drove off without ceremony, and she stood in the yard after the truck had gone with the particular feeling of a person trying to locate the boundary between practical and something else, and finding the boundary less clear than she had arranged it to be. The spring clutch of 1933 produced 61 poults. She lost 7 in a wet cold spell in early May and raised 54 to ranging age. 41 were toms. She shipped 8 to the Drake on the 1st of September, 8 to the Mayo in Tulsa on the 15th, 12 to the Skirvin in Oklahoma City in October. The remaining 13 went to the Drake's Thanksgiving order, which Klimp had requested in a letter that used the phrase preferred supplier without apparent irony. The checks arrived through October and November in amounts she added to the running total in her ledger. In November of 1933, Nora Vance walked into the Pawnee County Federal Land Bank with a check for $270 and paid the remaining balance of her father's land note in full. Harold Prine wrote, "Satisfied, paid in full," in letters that were, she thought, slightly larger than his usual handwriting, and handed her the canceled note across the desk. She drove home on a November afternoon with the canceled note on the seat beside her and the winter light flat and gold across the bottomland that was hers, entirely, without encumbrance. She decided she would feel it from the kitchen table. Raymond Flint wrote to her in January of 1934. The A&M Extension Program was organizing a 3-county poultry conference in Tulsa in March and was looking for producers with documented results to speak. He had heard of her operation through the Drake Hotel's buyer, who had mentioned her at a purchasing conference in Chicago in November. He asked if she would be willing to present. She wrote back and said she would. The conference was a Thursday and Friday in Tulsa. Her water pump had finally given out in February, and James drove her to the station. He carried her bag to the platform and handed it to her at the passenger car door with the particular care of a man who is being accurate about what the moment is. "Have a good conference." He stepped back from the car door. She thanked him. She got on the train. She spoke for 40 minutes on the second day, on production cycles, breeding ratios, dressed yield, and the Railway Express logistics of reaching a Chicago hotel buyer in 36 hours. The questions ran 20 minutes past her allotted time, and Raymond Flint had to interrupt them by pointing at the schedule. 3 producers asked for her address before she left. One was a woman from Creek County with 40 acres and a question about Muscovy ducks and hotel buyers. Nora gave her the address and told her to write. She came home on a Friday evening train. James Carver was at the station when she arrived. She had not told him which train she was on. He had the truck running, and he carried her bag to it without explanation, the same as he had carried it to the platform 2 days before, and drove her home on the county road in the last of the February dark. He came inside when she asked him in, because she did not feel like being alone quite yet, and the offer was genuine. She made coffee. She told him about the conference, the questions, the woman from Creek County, the 3 producers. He listened the way he always listened, completely, without waiting for his turn. She set her cup down when she was done and looked at him across the table. He had his hat off. He had his hands flat on the table. He was looking at her with the expression he wore when he was about to say something he had decided. He said her name. She waited. "I've been coming by your farm on Sundays for a year and a half. He put his hands flat on the table. I fixed your brooder house roof without being asked, and I drove you to the station, and I drove you back. I'm not a complicated man. I'm telling you what that means in case it wasn't clear. It was clear. She held his gaze. He looked at her. All right. She looked back. 34 years old, with dark brown hair and chestnut amber eyes, and a way of being in a room that did not require any announcement. She had been aware of him for 18 months, and aware of what she was aware of for most of them. I'd like you to marry me. He put it plainly, the way he put everything that mattered. No arrangement to it, no performance. She thought about the 3 hens that had started this, the wire cage at Herb Decker's dispersal, the 19 poults that became 15 in a cold June night and became a canceled land note in November. She thought about the way he had carried her bag to the platform and not gotten on the train. Yes. She said it with the same plainness he had used, because that was the correct register for the moment, and she had always been good at register. He put his hand across the table and she put hers over it, and that was that. They were married on a Saturday in April at the Pawnee County Courthouse with 2 witnesses, because the courthouse was efficient and she had eggs setting in the brooder house. The county clerk, a woman named Agnes who had married at 17 and been widowed at 60, looked at Nora over her glasses and said she had heard about the turkey operation and that it was a fine thing. Nora thanked her. Agnes signed the certificate and said, "Take care of each other," the way a woman says something she has earned the right to say. The spring of 1934 was wet, and the grass came in thick, and the turkeys moved through the south pasture in the long afternoon light, all white, their tail fans bright against the green. James ran his grain operation, and she ran hers, and they did not combine the accounts because each one was its own logic. But they shared the table every evening, and the mornings felt different with another person's coffee cup on the counter, the kind of difference she had not known she was missing until it was there. Raymond Flint wrote again in the fall of 1934 to say the conference was expanding to 5 counties and he would like her to anchor the Heritage Turkey Session. He mentioned that the woman from Creek County had started a White Holland operation of her own and was already corresponding with the Mayo Hotel buyer in Tulsa. Nora wrote back and said she was willing. She told James at supper. He looked up from his plate and said, "Good. They expect that from you now." She decided it was the correct thing to say. Outside in the south pasture, the White Holland toms were settling for the night. The October light went amber and flat over the Oklahoma bottomland. The new brooder house, the one with the good tin roof, stood solid at the south end of the barn. The land sat under the last of the evening light without encumbrance, without lien, without the weight of someone else's arithmetic. It was hers. It had been her father's, and now it was hers and James Carver's, and someday it would belong to whoever came next, who would start with what she had built and not have to start from nothing, which was the whole point of building anything. The first bird had cost her 47 cents, paid with money she didn't have much of. That one white tom, fanning his tail in a wire cage on a Tuesday in April, had been worth every cent of the $480 she had owed, and everything that came after. If you've made it to the end of this story, thank you. Leave a comment below. Have you ever looked at something everyone else had passed over and seen exactly what it was worth? A piece of land, an animal, a skill, a person. Tell us. Your stories are what makes this community what it is. Subscribe if you haven't already. We'll have a new story for you next week.